A History, Part 3, The 11th Hour. The sky boiled with an angry mix of blue-grey clouds, threatening yet another downpour of apocalyptic acid rain. A warning siren rang out throughout the region, and the few Xicadian spiders still topside hurriedly scuttled their way towards the nearest subterranean shelters. At the Grand Palace of Gathering, a jointly owned facility representing the supernest Cimenia, of which Nest Citalia and Nest Cimagentia were both members, a crisis meeting of all the major xylectial queens had been urgently convened. Within the main auditorium of the palace stood Ximodian 97, a now somewhat elderly, seven-brained Xihari from Nest Zitalia, and senior scientist of global climatology, who, in collaboration with several other prominent experts, had petitioned the queens for a publicly audited town hall. In accordance with the laws that governed the powers of Xihari's senior elites, such a meeting could neither be ignored or denied a fair hearing. Cut against the background of the screaming shriek of the sirens, Ximodian could not help but feel that the very planet itself was desperately pleading for help. He supposed this kind of charged, arachnopomorphic thinking was likely coming from brain number 5, long proven by his neurologist brethren to be the source of his most powerful emotions. Yet this was hardly the time to allow unconstrained sentiment to take control of his senses. As a senior Xihari scientist, he was deeply wedded to the scientific method, and that method was cold and unfeeling. It dealt only with facts and figures, and those facts were his most valuable ally, but only if he could wield them with ice water running through his veins. An overinflated sense of moral outrage would only serve to alienate the audience, and that was the last thing he needed right now. The facts alone would tell the story needed to be told, a story about the future of their species, or, were they to continue down their current path, the complete and utter lack of it. If they had one thing going for them at least, it was the xylectial queens, some of whom were pushing nearly 7,000 years old, cared about the prospects of the Xicadian future, at least as much as they cared about the traditions of the past. He needed the queens to recognize the terrible gravity of the situation at hand. Just because their current way of life had served them perfectly well for countless millennia, it didn't necessarily follow it would continue to do so indefinitely into the future. Simply put, complacent inertia was no longer an option. The elderly scientist now stood at a lectern with a giant holographic display located directly behind him. It currently glowed with randomly generated ribbons hypnotically dancing through the air. The front row of seating tables were reserved for the xylectial queens, who jointly governed the supernest, with the last couple of representatives settling themselves in after having just arrived. A little further back was located the public gallery, where lines of general seating lay stacked up upon a steeply sloping embankment. This area was mainly occupied by a mixture of young Xylenian queens from smaller member nests, a few Zihari intellectual philosophers, specialists and engineers from a wide range of differing fields, along with various other high-ranking dignitaries. The great hall was now abuzz with the quiet chatter of curious anticipation. Ximodian took a final, sweeping glance across the expanse of gathered arachnids, steadied his nerves, and waved the holographic display into life. An image of Exynos Prime lit up the stage, and the virtual camera quickly zoomed out from the brilliantly lit star, smoothly sweeping its way past the rocky inner planets, before dramatically shooting past the gas giant Xylantia. It continued to blast its way through the seemingly endless void of space, finally coming to rest at the outer asteroid belt. At such a great distance, even the sun itself had faded into little more than a pallid dot of shimmering light. Having apparently made its point about their relative place in the universe, the virtual camera roared its way back to Xycadia and began to obediently orbit the planet. The audience was now treated to a captivating historical rendering of Xycadia in all of its holographic glory. Bathed in radiant light, falling upon deep blue oceans, generously populated with lush green continental land, it was hard not to be moved to a breathless kind of awe. A date now floated up into view, imposed over the smoothly rotating three-dimensional projection of the planet. According to the date, this was Xycadia, nearly 30,000 years ago. The calendar started to tick forward, slowly at first, but constantly gaining speed. As it accelerated its way through time, the image gradually started to change. Though just a little to begin, the beautiful vista was being insidiously replaced by something distinctly less vibrant. The colour of the oceans drifted from blue to a toxic shade of green, signalling the permanent end to all aquatic life. As the time-lapse pushed relentlessly on, the face of the planet became increasingly obscured, blurred out by a diffracting yellow shroud. The landmass started to shrink as the ocean levels continued to rise, an event that signalled their species' official transition to a predominantly subterranean life. Perhaps almost mercifully, the calendar finally paused as it arrived at the present year. The rotating image of Xycadia now went into freeze frame, and Ximodian held to a solemn silence, as if to give the gathered audience a brief moment to let what they had all witnessed sink in. The elderly scientist then turned to address the Xylectial queens directly.
So now that we have seen where we came from, where exactly do we think we are going? For are we not travellers in the river of time, and should we not care to know where the river might lead? Well, as it turns out, it is a disturbingly easy question to answer. Today, it is a much easier question than it was yesterday, and tomorrow it will become even easier than it is today. Very soon, whether or not we have free will become a question only of interest to academics and philosophers, because the wheels we have set into motion will no longer be able to be stopped. The laws of physics are very clear on this fact. They are the same laws that allow us to communicate at the speed of causality. They are the laws that have allowed us to build magnificent structures, such as the one we reside in today. The infallible tools of logic, which have allowed us to uncover the secret mechanics of the universe and bend them to our will, speak to us now. And they say we are at the precipice of a singularity. This is an event horizon we don't get to come back from. So allow me to show you all exactly where we are going.
Xicadian reactivated the holographic image, and the calendar started to rapidly fast forward into the future. After traversing another 10 millennia, every major landmass still above water had lost even the smallest speck of green. It was very hard to see any detail at all, as the atmosphere had become so dense that it made it difficult to penetrate with visible light. The calendar now came to a pause, and the virtual camera zoomed down towards the surface of the planet, revealing a depressingly barren hellscape. The oceans had started to boil, and the only precipitation came from deadly acid rain, something that they had already become all too well acquainted with. Was this really even Xicadia? But they had all watched the transformation take place with their very own eyes. The mood of the onlooking arachnids had turned distinctly sombre, and an almost deafening silence pervaded the air.
Today,
Xicadian proclaimed emphatically,
we must decide if this is our future. Yet as grim as the question may be, I speak to you now not as a doomer without hope. For while we will never restore Xicadia to what it once was, we might yet nurse her back to fragile equilibrium. We can earn ourselves a stay of execution, giving us time to pursue a decidedly different destination to that of global extinction. But please, don't underestimate just how dire our situation truly is. I can assure you this is neither a joke nor hyperbole. Yes, the Xmateri have served the Xihari, and the Xihari have served their queens. In turn, the queens have served the nests, growing them into an indomitable force of nature that seemingly nothing could topple. But I am here to tell you that they will all fall. Every single one. But before that happens, civilization itself will collapse and descend into chaos. On a planet no longer able to sustain our needs, Xicadian will go to war with Xicadian. Eventually there will be so little food and resources, we will literally eat our own young simply to stay alive. But it is the Xihari who should have done better. It is the blind loyalty to our queens that has led us down this darkened path, despite the fact that we have known for more than a millennia where it was going. Feeble attempts to warn with timid and cowardly voices, we did pitifully little to truly fight for our future. But that all changes starting today. Gatherings just like this are being held across the globe, and supernest after supernest are all being shown the same projected timeline of our terminal future. Xihari scientists and intellectuals across a wide range of fields have united together to form a globally unified think tank, which, from this day forth, shall simply be known as the Brotherhood of the Xihari.
Xicadian now raised his forelimbs in an attempt to preempt any protest.
No, in spite of what you may think, I assure you this is not a revolt, and we are not about to start telling our queens what to do. However, we sincerely believe we have found a way out of this mess, and have a vision for a much brighter future. Like a fork in the road, we have shown you our most probable path, but now please let me show you another.
Queen Xitalia, seated next to the other Xylectials, had known all too well what this meeting was all about. Xicadian 97, long one of her most prized advisors, had chosen, perhaps as a hollow gesture of loyalty, to confide in her shortly before the gathering had convened. knowing full well that she had no way to either control or otherwise influence the drama unfolding. He had nevertheless shown her the simple respect that, at the very least, ensured none of this came as a complete surprise. Even so, it still felt like a terrible betrayal. Xitalia thought to herself resentfully, as she gave the elderly scientist a baleful glare. The Queen very begrudgingly admitted, however, they had all travelled so far down the path of ignorant bliss, this inevitably became the only possible way to avert a complete catastrophe. Even as Ximodian had briefed her on what was about to happen, she knew the ultimate responsibility for the situation lay not with the Xihari, but with the Xylectial queens themselves. Collectively speaking, the Xylectials possessed hundreds of thousands of years of accumulated knowledge and wisdom, yet they had somehow still managed to expertly navigate their entire species towards the edge of complete and utter annihilation. And Xitalia, ever the pragmatist, understood all too well not even Xylectial queens were immune to the physical laws of the scientific method. As for those queens who might feel differently, they were very likely to find themselves isolated, alone, and ultimately as redundant as they were irrelevant. Ximodian had supported her while she had played her part in leading them to the very brink of disaster, and now she would return the favour, while he attempted to help navigate them all safely back away from it. Even if, she reluctantly admitted to herself, her decision was at least partially informed by a finely tuned sense of self-preservation. Ximodian reset the calendar back to the present day as the virtual camera jumped out to one of 3 satellite moons known as Xicades. With the calendar now being set back into motion, a small moon base began to emerge, quickly growing in both size and complexity. As the moon base continued to expand, it became increasingly obvious it was in fact a giant construction site for the engineering and fabrication of interstellar starships. After the passage of some 500 solar cycles, an entire fleet launched itself into the vastness of space and towards some distant and mysterious star. Some 200 years later, another fleet of ships left the orbit of Xicades, after which it became a constant procession of construction and launch cycles, as nest after nest fled Xicadia in pursuit of a better life, or perhaps even any life at all. Having told its story of such a grand vision of the future, the holographic projection now came to a halt. Ximodian, with a notably more upbeat demeanour, turned again to address the gathering.
I'm sure you all know Dr. Shimantana, only the greatest particle physicist Xicadia has ever known. Now, with that said, you may nevertheless be very surprised to learn that for the last several decades he has been leading an elite team of physicists and engineers on the secret development of a revolutionary new reaction engine using an antimatter generator and annihilation chamber. Now, I promise you it's not nearly as scary as it sounds, and the team has recently made some significant progress, which gives us tremendous confidence that it is not a matter of if but when we will have the technology necessary to power interstellar starships, capable of colonizing other solar systems within our own home galaxy.
Dr. Gimantana of Nest Gimagentia, seated near the front of the main audience, was the only currently living 9-brained Jihari on all of Xycadia, and as such was a source of great pride, celebrity and prestige for Nest Gimagentia. With a mild sense of bemusement, Xitalia found herself wondering exactly how his queen was coping with the revelation her superstar Jihari had been working on a clandestine project outside the control and awareness of her own nest. Then again, she thought to herself suspiciously, it was entirely possible, perhaps even probable, she actually did know. Under the circumstances, then, Xitalia decided it wisest to assume absolutely nothing about the current crisis unfolding.
You may, of course, be wondering, where exactly were those starships actually going? Well, as it so happens, another affiliate Supernest has been working on a sister project, titled with the improbably helpful name of Stellar Cartography. This prototype observation array in orbit around Xicades has already found 2 very favourable candidates as potentially habitable planets. Given the infinitesimal volume of space that we have so far managed to survey with our current latest technologies, this is a statistically outstanding result. We firmly believe by the time we are ready to colonize the stars, there will be an overabundance of possible destinations to choose from, allowing us to realize Xicadia's grand new destiny as spiders of the cosmic web.
Zimodian's upbeat countenance now quickly fell back to one of scholastic solemnity.
But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, I would respectfully remind you all that the current situation on Xicadia is beyond dire. Our vision of a future in the stars will surely fade into darkness if we lack the courage and foresight to do the difficult things ahead. There's simply no getting around it. The world simulation model has left very little doubts about that. We need to drastically alter our current trajectory through time if we want a chance to alter our trajectory through space.
The Jihari scientist paused briefly in order to fortify his resolve. He knew this next part of his presentation would decide whether their future lived or died.
First and foremost, we need to drastically reduce population.
There, he had said it, and in so doing had shattered an ancient Xicadian taboo.
In fact, we need to do far more than just that. We need to steeply reverse the trajectory, and our numbers need to go down by at least 50%. To say our current rate of growth is unsustainable would be an obscene understatement. There are simply too many of us. A quadrillion arachnids don't lie.
And now that he had hit them with the hammer, he needed to quickly tend to the wound.
Now I want to make it crystal clear. We are not proposing genocide, nor an instantaneous adherence to the new metrics. We have factored in what we believe to be a realistically generous timeline, upon which population will first cap out, and then slowly start to reverse back down. The process will be managed with dignity and respect to the traditional breeding cycles. It's simply the case that we need to fully embrace the new paradigm, which is that bigger nests no longer equate to better nests.
After a stunned moment of deafening silence, he very judiciously then added,
Yes, I understand that this most unwelcome new paradigm shift challenges a fundamental belief inherent in every single Xicadian, from Xelectial Queen to Shihari General and Himatiri Drone. But this is our moment of truth. We either rise above our genetic inheritance, or we die as a failed evolutionary experiment. When one puts it like that, it's really not such a difficult choice after all now, is it?
Ximodian, now feeling the oddest blend of relief, seasoned with an irrational splash of defeat, nevertheless sincerely hoped that his point had been adequately made without alienating the majority of the audience. He quickly moved on.
But population control is just one piece of the puzzle. While Zimantana's team have been tirelessly working on antimatter propulsion engines, we have had other specialists pursuing less exotic but no less important alternative solutions. Our future reserves must be clean, renewable, and functionally fit for purpose. Wind, solar, and thermal will all play a much bigger role in our new energy model. As too will thorium nuclear fission, while no other practical solution is available. Many of these systems are ready to be rolled out starting now, while on the horizon we continue our relentless march towards a viable fusion reactor. The bottom line is this: changes to our current energy programs must happen without pause or delay across every nest, because we are now officially out of time.
A few hushed but incredulous gasps could now be distinctly heard echoing through the auditorium. However, apparently still undeterred, Ximodian continued to push on relentlessly.
Now then, while there are many other sacrifices that will undoubtedly need to be made, the last one I wish to mention here today relates to the creation of reserves and sanctuaries. Our unmitigated success as a species has been homogenizing the planet's biodiversity. We are not the only Xicadians who have been put at risk by our rampant consumption and growth. It is a shameful fact that countless species became extinct long ago, due directly to our destruction of their habitats and ecosystems. This is a planet long void of mammals, and it is to our greatest shame that we did not do more to protect these fragile yet fascinating little creatures, now sadly consigned to the fossil record. Nonetheless, what little genetic diversity still remains, we must strive to preserve and protect, while we continue to call Xicadia our home. What I seek now should be unambiguously clear. We must unite against the greatest threat our species has ever faced, our own unmitigated and unregulated success. I humbly ask for the support of all the Xylectival queens present here today, and just to make absolutely certain that there is no chance of any misunderstanding as to the profound gravity of the situation, let me be crystal clear. The vast majority of Shihari across the face of Xicadia are all in on this.
Ximodian allowed a few moments for his words to sink in as he steeled himself in preparation for the tsunami he now felt was all but certain to come.
So, without further ado, and with the greatest of respect and reverence, I directly address the Xylectival queens sitting at council today. Any questions?
If I may.
Queen Ximogentia had apparently been the first to activate her voice amplifier, effectively blocking any possibility for the other queens to respond.
Queen Ximogentia has the floor,
Ximodian announced authoritatively, as if so far at least everything was going exactly to plan.
I have a rather shameful confession to make. Dr. Zimantana's covert assignment has been known to me for a considerable length of time. In fact, it would be a far more accurate framing of the situation to say his secret work was explicitly and unambiguously instigated by me. Everything unfolding here today has been both a hope and a dream I have carefully tried to nurture through to fruition for at least the last 3 cycles of my physical life.
The queens seated closest to Ximogentia were now all looking at her, aghast, almost as if she had just sprouted horns.
Yet, what you have all heard at this gathering is surely nothing more than what you already know in your heart of hearts. The storm on the horizon now sits directly above us, raining sulfuric acid into our eyes, that we might be blinded, or that we may yet be brought to our senses. No, Nest Ximogentia is not only behind this revolution to the fullest possible extent, it is unapologetically its primary sponsor. Our future lies in the stars, or as the dust beneath our feet. But don't be afraid. With the unmatched brilliance of Dr. Zimantana to light the way, we surely cannot fail. Please understand I will do whatever it takes to safeguard the future of my nest so it can continue to carry out its sacred duty. I thus humbly invite you all to join me as I expertly lead us all into a brave and exciting new epoch.
The Queen now slowly passed her gaze across all the other Zelectials in attendance, meeting them eye for eye.
But be warned. Those who continue to walk down the path of ignorant bliss will find that path to be rather shorter than they might have imagined.
Queen Ximmagentia now lapsed into a moment of theatrical silence, as if to double down on what many may have seen as a thinly veiled threat.
So now that my regrettable, yet nonetheless very necessary deception has been fully revealed, I will voluntarily retire from this council to allow the other Zelectial queens to continue with their deliberations, free of any perceived pressure or coercion.
Ximmagentia made as if to leave, but then turned again to address her peers one last time.
I would sincerely hope this day will become known as the defining moment in Xicadian history, when we took control of our own destiny and transcended into the new age of celestial immortality. But of course, it is not my place to decide our fate before it has even been written. Rather, I will simply close by saying, whatever you decide, decide wisely.
Queen Ximmagentia now imperiously exited the chamber. As Zitalia listened to Ximmagentia deliver her revelatory speech, she could not help but come to the conclusion her words were little better than those of a religious zealot. She was no doubt capable of great destruction in the pursuit and defence of her own personal crusade. Yet, at the same time, she also had to seriously entertain the possibility that at this unique moment in Xicadian history, Ximmagentia just might prove herself to be exactly what their species needed to help navigate them out of the abysmal crisis they all now found themselves hopelessly trapped within. Zitalia, quickly snapping herself out of her momentary reverie, anxiously tried to activate her audio amplification, only to find that it had already been claimed by someone else.
Queen Shimalisa has the floor,
Zimodian announced, somewhat reluctantly, a note of genuine concern very evident in his voice.
Well now, it does rather sound, doesn't it? As if Xicadia is about to undergo very tumultuous change.
The elder queen gave great emphasis to the word change, as if it were central to a point of some considerable amount of contention.
And I would not try to deny any of the facts, as sparse as they have undoubtedly been presented to us here today. Surely only a fool would be so blind as to crawl off a cliff, when so many would warn of its approach. And such a fool would no doubt have perished a long time ago, due to their own terminal stupidity. But as we can all plainly see, I stand before you here today, alive, well, and evidently very much not a fool.
Ximalisa lifted her 3 forelimbs up into the air, with a mock expression of perplexed confusion written all over her face.
So please take me very seriously when I tell you the problem lies not with the veracity of the facts, but rather the profoundly deceptive incompleteness of them. I was hardly sure if this was Ximodian the distinguished scientist, or Ximodian the parlour show illusionist, who took us all on a fantastical and paranoid journey into our own self-assured destruction. It was almost as if this so-called world simulation model—
Shimalisa spat the words out of her mouth as if she had just bitten into something intolerably bitter.
had magically gained the powers of omniscient foretelling.
The Xylectial Queen now made a show of staring accusingly at the elderly scientist.
Wouldn't it indeed be grand if we could so easily look into our own future and thus avoid all of our mistakes before we had even made them? Perhaps Xicadian can also use his technological alchemy to defeat the paradox of time travel, because it very much appears to me he has somehow managed to perform the miracle of turning lead into gold, or so he would have us all believe.
Ximeliza now turned her attention back to the main audience.
But no, I think maybe not. Perhaps Xicadian would be better suited to the arts, for such an imagination as his might best be understood by the poet's pen or the painter's brush, rather than by the Shihari intelligentsia, where he masquerades as a legitimate scientist hiding behind a flimsy simulation, all the while telling us that his apocalyptic vision of the future is somehow to be confused with scientific fact.
Some distinctly agreeable rumblings started to emerge from the public gallery.
I think we can all reasonably ask ourselves the question, is half the truth just a particularly pernicious lie that cravenly attempts to disguise itself as something far greater? And is that not the art of the politician, a profession surely far more suited to a Ximotiri drone rather than a Xihari elite?
"The Xihari scientist is a liar!" shouted an unknown arachnid from the shadows of the gallery, before Ximeliza quickly raised her hands in a gesture that apparently called for calm.
No, do not allow yourselves to be so easily fooled by Ximodian's blatant scaremongering and technological parlor tricks, cunningly disguised through the abusive misuse of science. This is no selfless act of altruistic benevolence, I can assure you of that. It is a breathtakingly brazen power grab, intent on reshaping the very fabric of Xicadian society, and to the singular benefit of a very select group of autocrats, otherwise known as the Xihari elite.
Ximeliza, sensing that the mood had now very much swung her way, quickly took to full flight.
The Xihari peddle in fear, the fear of an uncertain future. If we succumb to this masterful act of global deception, we will find ourselves ruled by a shadowy new world order, where the queens themselves have become shackled and tamed, turned into little more than puppets, dancing on the strings of their new Xihari overlords. No. If you still value the sacred traditions of our ancient society, then I beseech you to find the courage to stand strong against this most unholy attack on the natural order.
The Xynectial Queen waved a forelimb towards the scientist accusingly.
What tragic times we now live in, when the Xihari could forget themselves to such a degree. They would clandestinely betray their very own queens in a vanity-fueled pursuit of absolute power. I can't help but wonder what their own ancestors might have thought of such shockingly aberrant behaviour. Would they have been ashamed? Well, I rather think the word ashamed scarcely does justice to what their true thoughts might have been in the face of such blatant betrayal.
Ximeliza flashed a shit-eating grin at the scientist before swiftly turning back to address the main gallery.
Change. Yes, change. But nothing even remotely as dramatic as this sensationalist one-sided sham of a presentation has tried to scare us all into believing. At this moment I am more ashamed of being called a Xicadian than I have ever been in my nearly 5,000 years of unbroken rule.
The Queen kept her eyes firmly fixed on her audience, but swept a dismissive forelimb in the direction of the scientist.
The mighty and exalted Xihari, who have fooled us all into believing more brains always equates to a superior mind, may well think themselves to hold an important, and some might even say crucial place in the structure of our society. Yet the truth says something very different. The truth says they are very few in number, but a tiny fraction of our overall population, and given power only at the sufferance of their queens. So let me be crystal clear. If my own Shihari betray me, there will be no refugee status afforded. No, they will not live to see another day, because it seems that in all their hubris and bluster, they seem to have forgotten a rather important fact. They are replaceable.
Queen Shimaliza rose from her table and took a threatening step towards the aging scientist.
Understand this, Ximodian. You and your kind are no longer the saviors of our race. You want to lower the population. Well, be careful what you wish for, because Xicadian will go to war with Xicadian, but it will have nothing to do with our diminishing resources and everything to do with your abandoned loyalty. There is nothing more that can be said in the face of such naked treachery. To this so-called sham of a committee. Consider my membership to the Supernest null and void, due to the treasonous actions of the Black Queen Shimagentia.
Ximaliza, in an act of masterfully staged theatrics, tore the throne table she had been sitting on from its base, and then ferociously hurled it at Ximodian. Despite his advancing years, he easily plucked it out of the air and carefully placed it back to the floor. With a contemptuous chirp at the scientist, she turned back to face the audience to deliver her parting shot.
Queen Shimagentia is right about one thing at least. Today is a truly historic day, but she will not go down in history as the saviour of our species, far from it. No, she will be remembered only in infamy, as the queen who tried to bring everything we have worked so hard to build to its knees. And in that, she will fail, as will all who are foolish enough to stand against me, and every other queen courageous enough to wage a most righteous war against this rising tide of evil.
Shimaliza now frostily left the auditorium, hastily trailed by her Shimatiri dignitaries from the main audience. Her Shihari children, however, were all rather conspicuous by their absence. Zetalia desperately attempted to re-engage her amplifier. Things were spiralling dangerously out of control. She had to try and salvage the situation, while there was still something left to salvage. Maybe the other Xylectials had not quite realised it yet, but to find themselves isolated and alone would present a very real and immediate threat to the future of any individual queen. She had to save the supernest from falling apart, as if her very life depended on it. Because the simple truth of the matter was, it was very likely it did. To her considerable relief, the small light at the side of her table blinked twice in quick succession, and then lit up brightly.
Queen Xitalia has the floor,
Ximodian announced, somewhat pensively.
Firstly, and most importantly, I would beseech all fearless seekers of the truth to practice the much undervalued art of restraint. Clarity and lucidity of mind simply cannot be achieved in the face of overwhelming passion. Yes, we are a race of warriors, but at this moment in time, it is not our ability to slay, but our ability to remain rational and calm in the presence of an adversary we do not yet fully understand the true nature of.
The auditorium, now under the thrall of Queen Xitalia's undeniable gravitas, quickly returned to a respectful silence.
Condemning the messenger will not change the message, No, there is no wisdom or courage to be found in denying that which we would rather not hear. But let me speak frankly. This is not about picking sides, because there is only ever one side, and that is the side of Xicadia. Here is a simple truth. Xicadian is one of the finest minds I have ever been blessed to bring into the service of Nest Zitalia. He's been nothing but a loyal and brilliant servant who has unwaveringly done what he has felt to be in the best interests of his own nest.
Zitalia waved a forelimb in the direction of her seven-brained prodigy.
But whether or not Xicadian is an arachnid of honour, and I know for a fact that he is not the crucial question we need preoccupy ourselves with right now. The real question, the essential question, is, are we to believe that all Shihari across the face of Xicadia have suddenly turned into traitors? I wonder what powerful force could cause such a thing to possess the most brilliant and loyal minds our species has ever known. Could it be that this terrible cataclysm they say is descending upon us might actually be real? Well, regardless of your personal opinion, one thing is beyond any doubt. They believe that it is, and there is simply no rational reason to think that they have any agenda beyond that of securing the long-term survival of our species. I will not go to war with my children, for it would be an act of truly sublime folly and utterly doomed to failure. If this planet really is in the process of dying, then it is the queens, not the Shihari, who carry the ultimate responsibility. And in such a time of crisis, I believe we would be very well advised to trust not only in our Shihari's intelligence, but in their new think tank-derived wisdom as well. I stand by Xicadian, as he has always stood by me, and I ask all other Zelectial queens to secure the future of this supernest by choosing to do exactly the same.
The grand hall now held to a deafening silence, as if it sat precariously balanced on the edge of a knife. Strictly speaking, the elder Queen Ximagentia was the most senior authority within Supernest Ximenia. However, it was Queen Zitalia who possessed the most sophisticated military capabilities, thanks largely to her Zybot augmented army. The fact that she had signalled so unambiguously her alliance with Ximagentia had transformed the prevailing mood in the air to one of volatile indecision. This could go either way, the Queen thought to herself grimly. The bottom line was, given Queen Zimaliza's apparent lack of strategic nuance, as evidenced by her appallingly ill-advised rhetoric, and her deeply offensive innuendo targeted at one of her very own children, knowing which side to choose hadn't exactly been difficult. Zitalia now rose imperiously from her throne in a final bid to tip the balance.
The equation that now towers above us all is as simple as it is profound. United we stand, and divided we fall. Now tell me, am I wrong?
Zitalia allowed her audio feed to go down, noting with a certain amount of chagrin that it was immediately claimed by one of the other queens in attendance. This was going to be a very long day. She stared accusingly towards Xicadian, catching his eye. Oh, but Xicadian, my renegade child, I don't doubt for even a moment you've got both the courage and the cunning to match those defiantly treacherous brains. But for the sake of my nest, and for the sake of your queen, you'd better not fuck this up. Historical footnote from the curated archives of Shi Wu. So it was then Queen Zitalia played a crucial part in holding the supernest together during a time of unprecedented crisis. Slowly, and not without many setbacks, did the Xicadians preserve their planet's fragile ecology and clumsily navigate their way to the stars. Some, however, were not quite so lucky. Queen Zimaliza was assassinated by her own bodyguards not long after the War of Resistance had even begun, as it quickly became undeniably clear that her position, without the support of the Zihari generals, was desperately hopeless, and that she was, after all else was said and done, on the wrong side of history. As for Queen Zimogentia, she became a larger-than-life symbol for the new postmodern generation of Xicadians who saw their future in the romanticized frontiers of space rather than on a slowly decaying planet. Perhaps tragically, due to an alleged early-era space accident that saw Zimogentia, along with her entire fleet of starships, vaporized into pure energy, she never got the chance to taste the fruits of her labor. Queen Xitalia, for her own part, still thought about Zimogentia from time to time, and pondered whether or not she would have committed herself to such a messianic vision of the future, had she been forewarned of what that meant for her own eventual fate. Slightly begrudgingly, Xitalia always tried her best to give Zimogentia the benefit of the doubt, and sometimes she even succeeded.